Today I'll show you one of the most dangerous queen traps in the Scandinavian defense. If your opponent brings the queen out early, you can trap it in just a few moves. Let's get started. White starts the game with pawn to e4, and black replies with pawn to d5. This opening is called the Scandinavian Defense, where black immediately strikes at the center and challenges white's pawn on e4. In this position, many players instinctively develop the knight to f3. However, this move is actually inaccurate here because it allows black to capture the pawn in the center while gaining time by attacking the knight. Black plays pawn takes e4, winning the pawn and forcing white to respond. Now white continues with knight to g5. This move reveals the real idea behind the earlier knight development. If black grabs the pawn, white immediately creates counterplay. The knight on g5 also puts pressure on the vulnerable f7 square, which is often the weakest point in black's position early in the game. If black becomes greedy and tries to protect the extra pawn by playing knight to f6, white can continue with pawn to d3, tempting black to capture yet another pawn. Black may decide to take it, especially because the pawn on e4 is doubled and looks awkward. So black captures on d3, white then recaptures with bishop takes d3, bringing the bishop into the attack and increasing pressure toward black's kingside, especially the pawn on h7. Feeling uncomfortable with this pressure, black might try pawn to h6 to chase the knight away. Unfortunately, this move turns out to be a serious mistake. White now plays the powerful knight takes f7, creating a devastating fork. If the king captures the knight, white responds with bishop to g6 check, attacking the king and the queen at the same time. The king is forced to move, and after the sequence continues, black inevitably loses the queen. It's a clever tactical trap that can punish careless play very quickly. Now let's take a look at another variation. Once again, the game begins with pawn to e4, followed by pawn to d5. This time, white immediately captures in the center with pawn takes d5, forcing black's queen to come out early. Black replies with queen takes d5, recovering the pawn. White now develops a piece while attacking the queen by playing knight to c3, gaining valuable time. If black retreats the queen to a5, white can continue normal development with knight to f3, preparing to castle and bring more pieces into the game while maintaining pressure on black's exposed queen. Now imagine black decides to play bishop to g4, trying to pin white's knight to the queen. At first glance, this looks like a normal developing move, but it actually allows white to gain the initiative. White responds with pawn to h3, immediately questioning the bishop. If black decides to capture the knight with bishop takes f3, white calmly recaptures with queen takes f3. This move not only restores the material, but also creates a direct threat against the b7 pawn, and the rook in the corner suddenly becomes vulnerable as well. Black now needs to defend. A natural move is knight to c6, which develops a piece and blocks the queen's attack on b7. However, this turns out to be inaccurate. White now continues with bishop to b5, pinning the knight to the king and increasing the pressure. At this moment, the knight on c6 is attacked twice while only being defended once. Black might try to solve the problem by playing queen to b6, adding extra protection. But this also runs into a tactical idea. White plays the powerful knight to d5, attacking the queen and at the same time eyeing the c7 pawn, which could lead to a dangerous fork. Since the queen is under attack, black usually moves it to a5. Now white continues with pawn to b4, pushing the queen even further and trying to trap it. The queen can capture the pawn because it is protected by the knight. However, even if black tries to capture the bishop, white still has a strong tactic. White now plays knight to c7 check, creating a devastating fork. The king must move to d8, and after that sequence, black's queen cannot escape and will eventually be lost. Now let's look at the third trap. The game again starts with pawn to e4, and black replies with pawn to d5. White captures in the center with pawn takes d5, and black recaptures with queen takes d5. White then develops a piece with knight to c3, attacking the queen and gaining time. The queen retreats to a5, and here white can play an interesting move, pawn to b4. This move offers a pawn sacrifice. The idea is to open the b-file for the rook while also creating more active lines for the dark squared bishop, leading to strong attacking chances. If black doesn't notice white's idea and decides to grab the pawn with the queen, white can immediately continue with knight to b5, creating a serious threat against black's position and preparing a fork. In most cases, black will retreat the queen back to a5 to defend the vulnerable c7 pawn. However, by doing this, black unknowingly steps deeper into white's tactical setup. White now develops actively with bishop to c4, placing strong pressure on the weak f7 square, which is often the most sensitive point in black's camp during the opening. At this stage, many players respond with pawn to c6. This move is extremely common and has appeared in countless games, but in this particular position it actually turns out to be a mistake. White can now strike with bishop takes f7 check. If black accepts the sacrifice and the king captures the bishop, white immediately follows up with queen to h5 check, launching a dangerous attack against the exposed king. Black will usually try to block the check by playing pawn to g6. Unfortunately, this defense fails tactically. Here comes the key move, knight to d6 check. This move not only checks the king, but also reveals a discovered attack on black's queen. If black captures the knight with pawn takes d6, white simply responds with queen takes a5, winning the queen and obtaining a decisive material advantage. There can be several variations within this trap, but this sequence shows the core tactical idea behind it. Now let's move on to the fourth trap. Once again, the game starts with pawn to e4, followed by pawn to d5. White captures in the center with pawn takes d5. But this time, since black's goal is to trap white's queen, black avoids the usual recapture with the queen and chooses a different plan instead. Instead of immediately bringing the queen out to recapture the pawn, black can choose a different approach. The best move here is knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4 and developing a piece at the same time. White will often reply with pawn to d4, a very natural move that strengthens the center. Now black captures with knight takes e4. After this, white may try pawn to c4, attacking the knight and gaining time. Instead of retreating the knight back, black can try the tricky move knight to b4. This move is actually not considered strong in serious play, so it's better used against less experienced opponents as a surprise trap. White can respond with queen to a forecheck, creating a fork. To deal with this, black plays knight to c6, blocking the check and protecting the knight on b4. White will likely continue with pawn to a 3, attacking the knight again. Black retreats the knight to a 6. At this point, white might feel confident and push pawn to d5, attacking the knight on a 4. Since that knight appears pinned, white may think black has no good options. But black has a clever resource. Knight to c5, attacking white's queen. To keep the pressure on the knight, white will usually move the queen to b5, but this allows black to play the strong move pawn to e5. This move opens lines for the dark squared bishop and also supports the knight. White will capture the knight with pawn takes e4, and at first glance it looks like black simply lost a knight. However, the queen on b5 is now awkwardly placed on the side of the board and has very limited squares. Black now plays pawn to b6, taking control of an important escape square and beginning to trap the queen. If white decides to move the queen to b4 to escape, black has a strong tactical response. Knight to d3 check. This move is powerful because it not only gives check to the king, but also reveals a discovered attack on white's queen. If white tries to remove the threat by capturing the knight with bishop takes d3, black can immediately respond with bishop takes queen, winning the queen and gaining a decisive advantage. This is a clever trapping idea that can appear in the Scandinavian Defense.